The year is 2030. You wake up and check your phone. The news headline reads, U.S. Census data confirms, middle class now represents less than 30% of population. You scroll further, median rent in a mid-sized city is $4,000 a month. A modest home costs $800,000. Your job, the one you trained years for, was automated last year. Your savings account, the emergency fund you built so carefully, has lost half its purchasing power to inflation. The grocery bill that used to be $150 is now $300, and all around you, two worlds are forming. The ultra-wealthy, who own assets, businesses, real estate, stocks, and everyone else, scrambling to survive paycheck to paycheck. The middle class, the backbone of America for generations, is gone, vanished. And here's the terrifying part. This isn't science fiction. This has happened 7 times in recorded history. 7 separate moments when the middle class was crushed. Wealth was transferred upward or restructured completely, and the majority of people woke up too late to do anything about it. And every single time, the warning signs were ignored. Dismissed as fear-mongering, laughed off as impossible, until it wasn't. If you want to understand where America is heading, if you want to see the pattern that's repeating right now in real time, hit that like button and subscribe, because this channel reveals the historical cycles they don't teach in school, the wealth transfers that reshape entire civilizations, and the early warnings that most people miss until it's too late. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly where we are in the cycle and what's coming next. So, what is a wealth transfer cycle? It's not a conspiracy. It's not a theory. It's a documented, repeating historical pattern where wealth shifts massively from one group to another. Sometimes it moves upward, from the poor and middle class to the elites. Sometimes it shifts sideways from old industries to new ones. And sometimes, rarely, it moves downward from the rich to workers. But here's the key. These transfers are driven by forces: inflation, war, technological disruption, currency collapse, policy changes, debt crises, and in every case, the middle class suffers the most. Why? Because the middle class holds the wrong type of assets at the wrong time. They hold cash when inflation hits. They hold jobs when automation arrives. They hold pensions when governments default. They trust the system when the system is breaking. The wealthy know this. That's why they hold land, businesses, commodities, things that survive the transfer. But the middle class, they get caught in the middle, and they get crushed. Cycle 1. Rome's elite capture and currency debasement. The Roman Empire didn't fall in a day. It eroded over centuries. And one of the key mechanisms of that erosion was the destruction of the middle class. In the early Republic, Rome had a strong middle class of soldiers, farmers, craftsmen, small landholders. They were the backbone of Roman society. But over time, as Rome expanded, as wars became constant, as the government needed more and more money, they started debasing the currency. The denarius, Rome's silver coin, started with pure silver. But every few decades, the silver content dropped. By the 3rd century, it was less than 5% silver. The rest was cheap metal. And what happens when you debase the currency? Inflation. Prices skyrocket. Wages can't keep up. The soldiers, the farmers, the craftsmen, they're all paid in debased coins that buy less and less. Meanwhile, the elites, the senators, the landowners, they don't hold currency. They hold land, estates, slaves, assets. So while the middle class is being squeezed, the elites are buying up more land, consolidating power, expanding their wealth. Over time, the small landholders lose their farms. They can't compete. They become tenants, then serfs, then slaves. The middle class disappears, and Rome becomes a society of ultra-rich elites and a massive, impoverished underclass. Sound familiar? Because right now, in the United States, asset holders, people who own stocks, real estate, businesses, have seen their wealth explode. Meanwhile, wage earners, people who work for a paycheck, have seen their purchasing power stagnate or decline. The pattern is identical. Cycle 2, the Black Death. Europe's sudden wealth flip. Not every wealth transfer moves upward. Sometimes, a catastrophic shock can flip the script entirely. The Black Death, the plague that swept through Europe in the 1340s, killed between 1/3 and 1/2 of the population. It was a nightmare. But economically, it triggered something unexpected. A reverse wealth transfer. Before the plague, Europe was feudal. Land was everything. The elites owned vast estates. The peasants, the workers, had almost no bargaining power. There were too many of them and not enough land. But when half the population died, suddenly there weren't enough workers. Labor became scarce, valuable. Peasants could demand higher wages, better conditions. They could move from manor to manor, negotiating. Landowners, who once held all the power, were desperate. They had land, but no one to work it. Over the next century, wages rose dramatically. Serfdom weakened. The feudal system started crumbling. Workers gained power, and the landed elites lost their stranglehold. This is the lesson. Shocks shift wealth instantly. A war, a plague, a technological revolution. And in moments of shock, wealth doesn't always flow upward. Sometimes it flows to whoever holds leverage in the new reality. Today we saw a glimpse of this after COVID. Workers quit in record numbers. The Great Resignation. Wages started rising. Labor had leverage for the first time in decades, but corporations are already fighting back. Automation, outsourcing, AI, the leverage is slipping, and if history is a guide, the brief moment of worker power won't last. Cycle 3, the French Revolution. Inflation and collapse. France, in the late 1700s, is bankrupt. Wars, especially funding the American Revolution, have drained the treasury. The government is desperate, so they try something radical. They seize land from the Catholic Church, and they issue a new currency called the assignat, backed by that land. At first, it works. People trust it. But then the government starts printing more assignats and more to fund wars, to pay debts, to stimulate the economy. Classic playbook. And just like every time in history, the result is inflation. Prices explode. Bread costs 10 times what it did a year ago. The people holding cash, the middle class, the small merchants, the workers, they're destroyed. Their savings become worthless. But the elites, they don't hold cash. They hold land, gold, foreign assets. They see the inflation coming, and they move their wealth. And when the dust settles, when the assignat collapses completely and France returns to a hard currency, the wealth has been transferred. The middle class is gone. The elites are richer. The poor are poorer, and a new power structure is born. Now, look at the United States today. Since 2008, the Federal Reserve has printed trillions of dollars. Quantitative easing, stimulus, COVID relief, and what's happened? Asset prices have soared. Stocks, real estate, commodities. If you owned assets, you got rich. But if you held cash, if you lived paycheck to paycheck, you lost purchasing power. The French Revolution teaches us that inflation is the most efficient wealth transfer mechanism ever invented, and it always flows the same direction. Up, cycle 4. The Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution created enormous wealth, but it also destroyed the middle class of its time. Before industrialization, Europe and America had a thriving artisan class. Skilled craftsmen, blacksmiths, weavers, shoemakers, carpenters. These people made good livings. They owned their tools. They controlled their work. They were the middle class. Then the factories came, machines that could weave cloth 100 times faster than a human. Foundries that could produce metal goods at scale. Assembly lines that turned skilled labor into unskilled, repetitive tasks. And within a generation, the artisan class was gone. The weavers couldn't compete with textile mills. The blacksmiths couldn't compete with industrial forges. They lost their shops, lost their status, and became factory workers. Low paid, no ownership, no leverage. A new middle class would eventually emerge. White-collar workers, managers, professionals. But it took decades. And in the meantime, millions of people fell down the economic ladder. Now look at today. AI is replacing paralegals, accountants, writers, designers, customer service reps. Automation is replacing truck drivers, warehouse workers, cashiers. The jobs that built the modern middle class are disappearing. And just like the Industrial Revolution, the people being replaced are told, don't worry, new jobs will be created. And maybe they will, but not for everyone, and not fast enough. The pattern is repeating. Technology disrupts, wealth consolidates, and the middle class shrinks. Cycle 5. The Great Depression, the 1920s, were roaring. The stock market was booming. Real estate was hot. Everyone believed prosperity was permanent. And then it all collapsed. 1929. The market crashes. Banks fail. Unemployment hits 25%. Families lose their homes. their savings, everything. The middle class is devastated. But here's what most people don't realize. The wealthy survived. In fact, many got richer. Why? Because they had cash when assets were cheap. When homes were foreclosed, they bought them for pennies. When businesses went bankrupt, they scooped up the assets. When stocks hit rock bottom, they invested. The Great Depression was the greatest wealth transfer in American history. Not because the rich caused it, but because they were positioned to benefit from it, and the middle class wasn't. Fast forward to 2008, the financial crisis hits. Millions of Americans lose their homes. Retirement accounts are slashed, jobs disappear. But Wall Street gets bailed out, and within a few years, asset prices recover. By 2020, the stock market is at record highs. Housing prices are soaring, and the wealth gap is wider than it's been in a century. Then COVID hits. Small businesses shut down. Millions lose their jobs. But the Fed prints trillions. The stock market goes up. Real estate goes up. The rich get richer. And the middle class falls further behind. It's the same pattern. Crisis, collapse, consolidation, and every time, the middle class pays. Cycle 6. Post-Soviet collapse, 1991 to 1998. When the Soviet Union collapsed, it happened fast. The ruble became worthless. State assets were privatized, and in the chaos, a small group of well-connected insiders grabbed everything. The factories, the oil fields, the banks, the natural resources. Overnight, they became billionaires. Oligarchs, meanwhile, the average Russian saw their savings evaporate. Their pensions disappear, their jobs vanish. The Soviet middle-class teachers, engineers, doctors was destroyed. An entire generation lost everything, and the wealth didn't just transfer, it concentrated. Russia went from communism to one of the most unequal societies on earth in less than a decade. Now, you might think, that's Russia, that's corruption, that could never happen here. But look at the United States after 2008 and 2020. A handful of corporations now control more wealth than entire countries. Billionaires have seen their net worth double, triple, quadruple. Meanwhile, homeownership is out of reach for millions. Wages are stagnant, debt is crushing, and economic mobility, the idea that you can work hard and move up, is dying. We're not Soviet Russia, but the pattern of elite capture, of wealth concentration, of middle-class evaporation is the same. Cycle 7. The 2008 to 2020 quantitative easing era, the everything bubble. For over a decade, central banks around the world printed money and bought assets. They called it quantitative easing. The goal was to stimulate the economy. But what it actually did was inflate asset prices. Stocks went up, bonds went up, real estate went up. If you owned assets, you won the lottery. But if you didn't, if you were young, if you were working class, if you were living paycheck to paycheck, you got left behind. The wealth gap exploded. The middle class shrank. And by 2020, the top 1% owned more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. Then COVID accelerated everything. More printing, more stimulus, more asset inflation. And now, in 2024, we're living in the aftermath. Housing is unaffordable. Education is unaffordable. Healthcare is unaffordable. And the distance between the asset-owning class and everyone else is wider than it's been in a century. This is cycle 7, and we're still in it. So what do all 7 cycles share? First, wealth moves upward during inflation. Every time the people holding cash lose, the people holding assets win. Second, wealth moves to innovators during technological revolutions. The old jobs disappear. New fortunes are made, but most people get left behind. Third, wealth moves away from savers. During currency resets, if the money changes, if the system resets, the people holding paper lose everything. Fourth, the middle class always pays for the transition. They're not rich enough to protect themselves. They're not poor enough to get help. They're stuck in the middle, and they get crushed. So why does 2030 look terrifyingly similar? Because every signal from the past 7 cycles is flashing right now. AI is replacing millions of middle-income jobs. Lawyers, accountants, writers, designers, drivers, warehouse workers. The jobs that built the middle class are being automated. Housing is unreachable for new families. Prices have doubled in 5 years. Wages haven't. An entire generation is locked out. U.S. debt is exploding. 35 trillion and rising. The only way out is inflation or default. Both destroy the middle class. Central bank digital currencies are coming. Governments around the world are building them, and when they launch, financial control will be total. They can track every transaction, freeze accounts, program the money itself, and global trust in the dollar is eroding. BRICS nations are building alternatives. Oil deals in yuan. Trade in local currencies. If the dollar loses reserve status, the shock to the American economy will be catastrophic. Every one of these forces, technology, housing, debt, currency, control, has triggered wealth transfers in the past, and they're all converging right now. Here's the final warning. The middle class doesn't vanish overnight. It erodes. Slowly at first, then quickly. Rome took centuries. The Soviet Union took a decade. The 2008 to 2020 cycle took 12 years. But the acceleration is real. And once it starts, it's almost impossible to stop. The wealthy see it coming. That's why they're buying land, gold, Bitcoin, assets. They're moving wealth offshore. They're diversifying. They're preparing. But the middle class, most are still trusting the system, still believing that hard work will be enough, still holding cash in a savings account, earning zero interest while inflation eats it alive. History doesn't repeat exactly, but the pattern is clear. And America is walking the same path that Rome, France, Russia, and every other empire walked before. The wealth transfer is already happening. The middle class is already shrinking, and the window to prepare is closing fast. So pay attention. Watch the signals, watch the debt, watch the technology, watch the currency. Because by 2030, the America you know may look very, very different. And the question isn't whether the middle class will vanish. The question is, will you be ready when it does?